Hello, Carla.
Hello, Chris. How are you?
Happy President's Day.
Thank you.
Is that
Thanks.
something people say?
You know what? Because it's so close to, and I just celebrated a birthday this past weekend. I love President's Day because it
Oh,
always
okay.
meant, 3-day weekend or something like that. So, but I mean, do I honor it? I don't think about the presidents. I think of myself. So
Well, one thing I think is worth considering is that this is it's going to sound like a bit of a stretch, but
okay.
when you honor President's Day, you honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And here's
Mm,
why.
okay.
We used to celebrate Washington's birthday and we used to celebrate Lincoln's birthday as two separate days in February. And when they approved MLK Day, instead of giving people another day off, they said, let's take these two holidays and make it President's Day. So it's
Wow.
because of President's Day that we have Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
The more you know. How do you know this? That's so cool.
I have knowledge that sometimes I don't know or get to share it, except if I'm playing like Trivia Pursuit or watching Jeopardy.
Yeah.
So it can get annoying. I will tell you, my sort of like subterranean knowledge often annoys my wife because when it does come up, right, it's like, okay, Mr. Knowledge.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like it. Anyway, we intentionally invited the guest that we have today on for our President's Day show.
Okay.
Um, so I'm just gonna go ahead and bring him on.
Let's do it.
Zak Malamed. Hello, Zak.
How's it going,
Welcome.
Chris? Hi, Carla.
Hi.
Thanks for
Zak,
having me.
among a lot of things that I know you from, the reason I thought that it'd be good for you to talk today is because we're not in a presidential election year, but during the last presidential election year, you launched something called the Next 50, which I think was about recognizing that an election is more than just the presidency, right?
Yep.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, when I launched the Next 50, I actually wasn't working in politics, but I noticed a lot of folks, young people around my age, who perhaps weren't interested in marching on the street, weren't interested in knocking on doors, or maybe even didn't want to sign petitions, but had $25 a month to give to politics and had never really been asked to give before. Or if they've been asked to give, they've been asked by an annoying email campaign that kept bombarding their inboxes to the point where they're just like, what am I even giving to in the first place? We actually started by hosting the presidential candidates because I was living in the Bay Area. We started hosting the presidential candidates as they came through, hosted 18 presidential candidates across 5 cities. But truly, like the eye-opening moment for us was when the pandemic hit. We had already trained some of the presidential campaigns on hosting Zooms as a fundraising avenue. And we started to meet these young down ballot candidates running in swing districts across the country, and we'd raise as much money for them or more than we did for some of the presidential candidates. And so that's when I realized like we had a niche there, and we built an organization called the Next 50 that's focused on creating a more representative democracy. We do that by investing in 50 young leaders every 2 years, primarily those running in swing districts and states, and those who face structural barriers running for office. And what I mean by structural barriers are people who are not born into donor networks. One of the most important things when it comes to running for office is having the access to capital to run. If you speak to the representative of any political party and you decide that you want to run, the first question they're going to ask is, how much can you raise from your friends and family? And the unfortunate reality is there are a lot of really great leaders in our communities who don't come from a network of friends and family who can help them raise $250,000 in 2 weeks, let alone know one person who can give them $5,000. And so the Next 50 is really built around addressing that challenge, but also acknowledging that politics is not about a single election cycle. It's about long-term power building. And so the Next 50, yes, is about 50 leaders under 50, but it's also about the next 50 years. And that's what we're building for.
Are there candidates from that initial cycle that you mentioned that are now serving in office and doing
Yeah.
things that you point to and saying this is amazing that it came from this?
I have to admit, we do tend to lean partisan. We do tend to lean left in our work, and so one of the candidates that I'm most proud of and excited about is Samra Brook. She was elected to represent Rochester in Albany, or the Rochester area in Albany. And when she was running for office, she was running to flip a seat that hadn't been flipped in about a decade or two. She was also running to become the first Black woman to ever represent Western New York in Albany. And in the process, she not only did that, but she also gave Democrats a supermajority in the state Senate. And that supermajority has led to a lot of really strong policies and a stronger redistricting process take place for Democrats. But now Samra is also serving as chair of the Mental Health Committee, and we know for our generation how important mental health is as an issue. In fact, the Harvard Youth Poll that goes out about once every, I think about half year or so, recently came out and highlighted the fact that mental health was among, if not the top issue for young voters. And so Samra is now serving on that committee, leading that committee. But in the process has also allocated close to $1 million in infrastructure funds to our community. And so she's really delivering, but she also made history in the process. And for us, that encapsulates the kind of story that we hope to tell, not just for Samra, but for 50 leaders every 2 years.
Awesome. Whenever you shout out Rochester, I have to shout out my friend Jennifer Gaddu, who lives in Rochester, deep cut there. Hello, Jen. Hopefully you're watching. Carla, want to jump in at all on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so blown away by all that you've done and all that you're working on. How do you get started on this? I think that's like the one question that I'm like, wow, like there's a lot of passion in that, but like what clicked for you, and at like what point in your life were you like, this is what I want to do?
It happened organically. You know, I had moved out to the Bay Area to work in philanthropy, education philanthropy. So my background was actually starting and leading an education advocacy nonprofit called Student Voice. It helps students advocate for equity in education. And then I went to work on a philanthropic initiative to rethink the American public high school, and then was at Facebook, where I launched their youth leadership and civic education programming. But I remember 2 weeks into the job at Facebook, I had a pre-planned trip to Auschwitz, the concentration camp in Poland, with my grandmother and my sister. And I went on that trip, and I come back. Of course, anyone who's ever been knows how harrowing, but also eye-opening that experience can be. But I come back, and at the Facebook office, there are images around the office that are, I should say, there are monitors around the office showing the news of the day. And the first day back, I look up at the monitors, and I see images of children getting detained at the border and separated from their families. And I turned to my colleague on the left, who'd been at Facebook for about 11 years, and I said, "What am I doing at Facebook right now? What are we doing at Facebook right now?" And I always had a calling or a desire to serve, but I never knew exactly how. And so the first thing I did in 2018 was just go knock on doors. I knocked on doors, helped get people out to vote. But then I started to really immerse myself in understanding the political landscape. And I've always been interested in developing and supporting young leaders. That's what we did at Student Voice. It's now what we do at the Next 50. And I was very much taken back by the fact that between 2008 and 2014, conservatives spent 3 times as much, or 500 million more, in their young people than did the left. And right now, over 50% of those 50 and under in Congress are Republicans. And I think that just captures the fact that folks on the left don't invest in their young people. There's a reason that a lot of young voters have actually started to swing, when Trump's not on the ballot, towards Republicans, because Republicans invest in them. And it's not just white young voters, it's voters of color. Young voters of color are swinging towards the Republican Party. And so what I, as a Democrat, who actually was previously, I will point out, a Republican, I grew up myself a Republican, what I ended up falling into was I met my U.S. Senator. She was visiting San Francisco. And she asked if I'd host a young professionals event for her in the Bay Area when she was running for president. And I said, let me think about it. I went home and I emailed every active or soon to be active presidential candidate, and ended up starting by hosting this little known mayor from South Bend, Indiana, who everyone came to know as Mayor Pete. And we had over 100 people come into the room, raised 5 figures. Wow, this is amazing. And by the end of the cycle, we'd raised over $4.7 million from over 17,000 donors across the country, both through in-person and online events. And I think one of the things that this taught me is the power of accessibility and proximity that you get from, and truthfully, like, one of the easiest ways to build proximity to political leaders is through fundraising for them. Now, you don't have to raise $4.7 million to do that. You can host your local municipal candidate and raise, hopefully $500 or $1,000, and introduce them to their local constituency. And that's power too. That's power building too. But en masse, a lot of candidates like to tout the average donation. average donation can be $18, $25. That comes from folks like you and me. And so what we made sure at every event that we hosted was that there was no minimum threshold to attending this event. That any event we hosted with presidential candidates, senators, governors, etc. And we made sure also that there was a selfie line at every event, so people actually had that proximity.
Love it.
So yeah, I think that's how I got started. But really, like, hosting presidential candidates almost felt like vanity by the end, because the presidential race costs about $1 billion. These other races to win cost a couple $100,000, and municipal level sometimes, a couple tens of thousands of dollars. And that's where the young people and people new to political giving can have a really high impact, and that's where we're investing our time and energy right now.
Zach, by way of wrapping it up, and because you mentioned vanity, I wanted to say one of the things I've always admired about you, and I don't know if I ever said this to you, is that you founded this organization called Student Voice, which I think has really done remarkable things in this space. And then there came a time when you were like, well, I'm not a student anymore, so it doesn't make sense for me to run this. And I think a lot of people would have said, form this great organization. It's mine now, right? And eventually you'd be like a 62-year-old president of Student Voice. Tell me about the choice you made not to continue heading up this work.
I remember like growing up in the work of Student Voice and being surrounded by a lot of extraordinary adult allies who were very supportive of our work. But Student Voice was always, look at the tagline there, the by students, for students nonprofit. Like, that's what makes Student Voice unique. And if I were to continue on the path of leading Student Voice in the capacity I was at the time, it wouldn't maintain that authenticity that I think really attracted people to it. And I value authenticity. But also I recognize the place of privilege I came from, growing up in and around New York, having access to folks who could fund this work. And I realized that, or I always challenged myself to get to a place where this was not about Zach. This was not about Zach's leadership. I mean, halfway through my leadership, people barely knew my name. They knew some of the other leaders who came from Kentucky, Iowa. I mean, you name the parts of the country. And to me, that's what building this organization was about giving other folks the opportunity to lead. I always knew as the leader and founder of the organization, like, I'd be a part of or a piece of the puzzle. But if we were really going to be effective as an organization, it couldn't just be about Zach, who grew up in the suburbs of New York City. And then there's this other piece, which is there was a founder of a nonprofit, or not the founder, but an executive director of a nonprofit that I had admired. I went through a training program for nonprofit leaders. And I vividly remember her saying that the most important decision that any founder makes of a nonprofit organization is who's going to replace them. And I felt like we had great leadership growing at Student Voice that was inhibited from continuing to grow if I maintained my position of leadership there. And what's been so extraordinary is to see how a lot of these young folks have grown and developed into leaders well beyond anything that, beyond what I was and what is capable of being. And I think Student Voice is in a better place because I'm no longer the executive director of it, and we'll continue to be in a better place as these leaders grow and develop.
Well, I would love to shout out folks like Andrew Brennan and Ian Kuhn and
yes.
the team that's there today, like Taylor and Jenna and Sydney and others, including Yvonne Mahesh, graduate of a big picture school in Washington, Gibson Egg High School.
Yes.
So it's been wonderful partnering with Student Voice. It's been wonderful partnering with you, Zach, and I think it's only
one quick thing, Chris.
Yes,
before
please.
we wrap up. Sydney's there, and this is when I knew Student Voice was in a place that was beyond me. Sydney came up to me at an event. It was in Malibu. A bunch of civic conveners we came together there. And Sydney came up to me and she's like, "Are you Zach from Student Voice?" I'm like, "Yeah." "How do you know who I am?" She's like, "I'm Sydney Ward. I'm a part of Student Voice right now. I'm from Utah." And a couple of things just went off for me. Like, wait, first of all, I have no idea who you are. I never met you before. And number two, Student Voice is in Utah too now? Like, this is amazing. And to see Sydney grow as a leader too, I'll always remember, like, that was the moment that Student Voice really grew beyond me, because it was someone who wasn't there when I was leading it. And I admire the leaders like Merritt and the others who you mentioned, who've taken Student Voice to this next level.
Zach, thank you for joining us. Happy President's Day. I think we can say that. I think
Happy President's Day sales too. Enjoy the sales.
All right. Zach, we'll talk to you soon, and thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris and Carla. I
Thank you.
appreciate you.
Carla,
Wow.
what a great conversation with Zach. I really appreciated it.
So inspired, Chris.
Yeah. And I think you probably know this. I want to connect some dots.
Okay.
After Zach had left Student Voice, you actually had a chance to interact with Student Voice folks during some of our Big Bang convenings. This is me gently segueing into registration for Big Bang 2022 is open, and you can find out more information about that at bplevents.org.
Yes, we want to see you at Big Bang and all of our other events.
and students over the last, well, let's forget the last 2 years, but over the last 3 years of in person, I feel like our student participation has doubled every year, and part of that has been the involvement of Student Voice as partners in that.
Wow. Listen, I need to get more involved politically now that I'm Zach truly inspired me. I'm like, wow. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you folks for joining us. If you had the day off and still watch Cup of Joy, thank you. If you're watching this post President's Day, hope it's just as warm a cup for you.
Ooh, love it.
That might have to be mine. All right. We'll catch you on the next time around.
See ya.
Bye.